Professor Jalote, as I said in the introduction, you are the founding director and also sitting director of IIIT Delhi. So the first question we want to know, let's assume somebody does not know what IIIT Delhi is. So what would you tell this person about what this institute is, what you do, what you want to achieve? So can you please share that with us?
Okay, so it's no different than any good university is supposed to be, which is to focus on research and teaching. But we right from start have said that our mission statement is to be globally recognized in education and research, in undergraduate education, postgraduate education, and be socially relevant, globally connected and industry facing. So we basically would like to have high quality teaching and high quality research. We've not said either or. We continue telling all our faculty that both are important. This is an academic institution, not a teaching place, nor a research lab. So you have to do both. Other than that, it's a state university funded by state for infrastructure, but it has a great deal of autonomy in the way its act is structured, act and statute. So in that sense, it is like IITs. IITs, the act and statutes were created by the central government. In this case, it is by state of Delhi. But the empowerment that is given is actually very substantial. So essentially, the number of positions, the salaries we give, the PhD stipend we may choose to give is all actually within the board, which is more than I think any institute of any government that has this kind of autonomy. Of course, the challenge on the other side, which has been put, is that we have to be financially self-sustaining after some 15-20 years.
So how do you plan to do that?
First of all, let me just say this is one of the best models I think that is emerged, where the government is saying that we'll give you land, we'll give you capital to build the campus, but on an ongoing basis, you have to be self-sustaining. Now, the reason is because if you want to expand education largely, then in a large scale, then you have to, the governments don't have the capacity, and globally higher education is now being viewed more and more as private good rather than public good. And therefore, globally you see the trend of people saying that since it's a private good, therefore the private person should pay for it. The challenge really is in the research component of it. And actually, if you see education, we've done the arithmetic, education can be sustained at the levels of fees that exist in IITs and other places today. The challenge is in supporting research. Now, research is expensive and indeed a public good. It's not a private good. And so research does need government support. So we are working with our government to say that, look, while you make education self-supporting, you have to agree to provide some support for research, and there's good models emerging. Not seed funding. What we've requested and they've agreed is that if we get X rupees from outside for research, you give us a matching X for it, because X is insufficient to fund research. So if you give us X also, 2X will handle our research. And they seem to have agreed, and if that happens, this would be the first state in India which would have taken this. Just to mention, formula-based funding is essentially quite common in many countries. It's where the formula may be dependent on your research output, on your student intake, etc., etc. In our case, formula-based, we haven't gone anywhere in India. So this, in some sense, is a formula-based funding for research, and that's a very good step. And I think we should be able to become self-sustaining in another 4-5 years.
So let me bring you back to when you started IIIT-D. So how many students you thought? What was the aim you wanted to have? How many students and faculty, and what was the goal?
So interestingly, we didn't have a long-term goal. We put a long-term vision, but we didn't put a goal. And but it was never conceived to be a very large institute, because the scope itself is somewhat limited. We are clearer now that it's likely to be maybe 2,500, 3,000 students and corresponding faculty. That's probably the size in the current form that we think it is going to emerge to.
And you also talked about the vision you had set out for the institute, and so one is that you have to do both, faculty has to do both research and teaching. So if I may ask, how successful you have been in implementing that idea?
So, so two things. If you want to do good research and good teaching, fundamentally you will have to assess. If you cannot assess, then these are words. And this is where I think as systems, by and large, we've not been very good at. We've just stated some goals, but we've not done some kind of feedback or assessment. Assessment is not the right word, feedback is the right. We haven't done enough feedback on whether a person is indeed how well he or she is doing on these, right? And so one of the founding principles on for IIIT was that it was my firm conviction that one of the banes of Indian academic is faculty complacency. I know many of my faculty colleagues may not like it, but I believe that that is the case. And I don't blame my colleagues necessarily for it. Colleagues, I mean in general, faculty colleagues across it. I think the systems, if you expect some certain amount, then that's what I'll deliver. That's how it works out. It's only a few people who are so motivated beyond what is expected that they will do this thing. And I really think that the systems also do injustice to the individual, because all the faculty 10, 20 years later, while they are faculty of an institute, many of us are we are all very smart people. We will have to ask the question, what did I do? And if I didn't contribute enough, then I have an answer. I don't find a good satisfactory answer for myself as well. So I think while the systems didn't do this aspect from the system aspect, I think they didn't do justice to the individual faculty as well by not doing this. So in any case, doing this, therefore, fundamental to any system is that you must have a feedback loop. Feedback and correction or feedback loop must be there. So we have in teaching. Teaching, of course, in most places there is student feedback, but I know in many institutes student feedback comes, but it does not become feedback for the faculty. Right. As a system feedback. It's something to come, but if I choose to throw it, then I can do so. So feedback is of no use unless I'm willing to act on it, right? The second is we have established certain expectations. We do yearly feedback on what the yearly contributions of faculty have been on teaching and research. We established a tenure system where the job is not permanent from day one, but 5-6 years later, if you've done well, you can become tenured. And the whole idea behind tenure is if you built up a momentum 5-7 years, then by and large you would be in that. Plus there is this regular yearly feedback loop, right? Now how successful we are at achieving this, I think if we look at clearly in terms of research, we are doing quite well. We've done some benchmarking in computer science, which is our oldest department, and we looked at publications, etc. I think we are in the top few per faculty publications. In ECE also we show up in the top few, so I think research wise we're doing well. I think education wise, I would think, now there isn't any easy way to compare education, because how do you take the output of education per se? But I think given the emphasis we gave, I would say the seriousness with which we take education is far more than I can think of any other institute. So I would think we are doing very well. And also our students, of course, their placements is good, but placements are good for in a lot of institutes, and you get good students, placements tend to be good. So that doesn't always say how well your education was. However, keep in mind that since we are, we are obviously the best students still choose to go to IITs, I believe. So we're still dealing with not the best perhaps. as measured by JEE, not necessarily best in some absolute sense, but as measured by JEE. And I think, our students are getting best of the jobs, and so I think the placement, etc., is just, I think, one of the top in the country now, within a few years. And I must say another little thing which sort of surprised me. It took us a little while to convince the companies that our education is good. The companies also, I realized, in India are very conservative. They have their own processes and go slowly. But I found US universities understood it very quickly. Within a year of our graduation, there were students who were getting offers from second batch graduated. There was Princeton, UIUC. I mean, how do they figure out that these boys and girls are to be picked up? There's toppers in every college. Why are they taking the topper from this college? So they had figured out, of course it is to faculty, we would write to them that this is our structure, this is our faculty, this is what it is. So I did send them some advance information, but they very quickly picked out, and every year we see many students getting fellowships from very good universities, and this is when we just graduated, 4 or 5 batches. So I think, they are willing to be open and assess the quality, and they found us good. So it's been, I think we're doing a good job.
So you just talked about tenure to kind of, to assess the progress on both sides, or more on faculty. So can you just explain us what do you mean by tenure and how is it implemented? Yeah.
So tenure is very common in America, but we have Indianized it, and let me just tell you what in our context it means. So in our context, it means that a faculty member gets first a 7-year contract, assistant professor, fresh assistant professor. 6 years is needed to be eligible for promotion for associate. And after 6 years, we will get at least half a dozen letters, some of them from outside, some of them this thing. Of course, your CV, we will set a committee to examine what your contributions are in both research and teaching. And we have a document which establishes the criteria that you have to be good or above in both of them. And we have a scale and all that kind of thing. Now, the reason why this is important is in India, to provide job security, which in itself is a good idea, but by doing it very early, what ends up happening is people who are even perhaps a misfit in the academic system, because of the security, will end up staying. Now, we said that, look, if you are a misfit, then it's not good for you, it's not good for us. And earlier we break relationship, the better off we are. The institute is better, you will also find better opportunities while you're young, rather than deciding 15 years later that academics is not my cup of tea. So I think in that spirit, and that is indeed the spirit of tenure certainly here, it is not to weed out, it is essentially to let the people know whether they are well suited for this. And so far I must say that everybody who's come up for tenure has made tenure, but I must say multiple people have left before, because their yearly reviews have given them some input which indicated perhaps that there may be a fitment issue. And we've had people who've left for industry because perhaps they were better suited there. We've have people who've left overseas, maybe they didn't like India or IIIT for that matter. So that is how I understand it, or we envisage it should play out, not to filter people, support them, but the people should leave early. But you have a handle. And also we've Indianized it in the sense that in US, the tenure outcome is binary, yes or no. You either get it or you don't get it. In our case, we've said you get it or you don't get it, means you leave, but you can also be given additional time to make it. So we are saying some people may ramp up very fast, some people may ramp up a little slower, but if the curve is positive, we will want to keep them. In US, they said if you haven't done so much in so many years, you're out. So we've Indianized it, so we provide some security as well. I mean, in that sense that if you're doing well, by and large, you will not have to leave.
So, is IIIT-D is one of the first ones to implement tenure? What's the scenario in India, if I'm trying to understand?
So, my understanding is that we may have been the first one, but I know TIFR had some format of it. I understand that Institute of Science has now implemented something very close to what we have. We also, they also give 3 years after the first assessment if needed, and they also have that it is given only once, which is what our guideline is as well. So I know Institute of Science now has it. Now the assessment, the evaluation for tenure, I would imagine they would also get letters from outside and so on and so forth. So we have a fairly rigorous assessment because we get letters and we see that. We ask the people to put their 5 best papers, what is their teaching outcomes and so on.
So would you recommend other institutes like government institutes or fully funded by government to kind of think about tenures? Would that help improve the quality of education and research?
So undoubtedly it will help, but let us be very clear. If you cannot implement it in a true spirit, in the sense that the assessment is fair, you don't do it. It is better to have the kind of system which is there, which is very codified and formula based, than a system which may be manipulated, unfair, etc., or less transparent. So I guess all the established institutions where there is professionalism can easily move. There is absolutely no doubt if they want to, because they have the credibility and the systems and autonomy to do it. But if you don't, then it's not a good system, because then people will manipulate it.
Yeah, and it can be excused to throw people.
Yeah, it can be excused. So we have it written down, it is documented, board has passed it, it is available to all faculty members, the process is there, the letter we sent out for writing, getting of letters, etc., is all known, and so it's fairly transparent. I mean, people still would have detailed questions. Tell me how many papers we write, and we say there's no formula, but your peers will assess and tell us whether you're doing a good job or not.
It depends on the area.
And depends on the area. That's why you can never codify it down to these numbers. So
let me just bring you back where we were starting before I move on. So you are a founding director. So I just want to know what were the challenges. You've been in now almost 10 years. This system has you put in place. So what would be like big challenges you would want us to know, or somebody to be aware of when they're establishing a new institute?
No, I guess the challenge is always in India first and foremost faculty, right? And while we've been fortunate to get this thing, but I mean, so therefore you have to first create an environment that can attract faculty. Now in the start, what does it mean, right? So in the start, people have to come with faith. So it's a tricky business. After first few people are there, then you can say there's a good environment. But in the start, and I think we were fortunate. Good people believed in what we had, but we set up this system right from start, very early, that there would be tenure, there would be yearly review, this is what is expected, and we will support for research and so on and so forth. So we set it very early. Once a few people joined, good people joined, then I think the process remained the same. I think then things became a little bit easier. But challenge is still the same. The other challenge which is there is how do you set these kinds of things when the systems around you are different.
Yeah.
So, but the way we figured, and that's what I told some people, some of the faculty, if you're concerned about job security, then probably you should not apply here. Because we think everyone should make it. If you're good, I mean, we're not even saying excellent or top class, we're saying good. And if you're not that, then, and if you're concerned that you can't make it, then perhaps you should not. But that is a challenge, because they will say, what.
I'm putting my best 5 years.
Yeah. So, but thankfully now we have data to say everybody who's come up there has made it. It's not that they've,
So while we are on the issue of building institutes, there is also in India particularly, we have seen it's not very easy to create good institutes, and maybe sometimes creation is easy and sustaining is difficult.
So let me just say about creation also. Creation is easy if you take the existing template and replicate it. Creation otherwise is very hard. It's much, much harder than in many ways sustaining it, right? But what we've in general done is we take a template and we replicate it. And that way creation is you take. So we've decided, and I'm fond of telling everyone, we've decided we'll say there's things to learn from IITs what to do, there's things to learn from IITs what not to do. And I said we will take good things from there, no doubt about it, but we must be cognizant of there are things that were very good in the start but may not be contemporary, and they are continuing because the way they are. So all our systems are, many of our systems are new. Now that is very challenging. So I had to set up some committees where I would do international committees, set up the document and get it reviewed. Many of these took me 2 years to write, to prepare. For PhD also we innovated. So everything we tried to borrow but also innovate. Then creation gets kind of hard and challenging. And then new issues come up. You think this is a good model only to find some faculty. So we have some faculty who, for example, one person who couldn't get promoted though he got tenure, he moved to a new IIT. So now, in some sense, it weakens your hands, right? You don't have because of the expansion that is taking place. Somebody who we didn't promote goes at a higher position in a sister IIT or in an IIT. So now, so the side effects of new things you do start emerging later. There's multiple other chota side effects that one sees. And so those are, then you have to keep correcting. So again, if you take an established template, you just go back to the parent institute, how do you handle the situation, you get it. Now every time, now and then we have to come up with a new, there's a situation, you have to think how to resolve it. So creation that way is now maintaining, of course, it's hard, but I think when we talk about maintaining, if you think about it, we talk about a physical maintenance of physical assets, and we generally have not had a very strong administration to maintain these things. So again, there also you need to be, so we've built systems where I get a monthly report on what is happening, SLAs for cleaning, there's that, some complaint system. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but again, if you don't build a proper feedback loop, undoubtedly the maintenance will also fall. There is no question about it. So, and this is not just about complaint when things go wrong. We do a yearly review by feedback from students and faculty and someone, how is the FMS, how is the security, how is cleaning, how is that, etc., and you sit with them and try to resolve it. So maintenance of physical continuing, and of course continuing of, we say keeping excellence of place. But if you don't have systems in place, the reliance on excellence is really entirely on people and their own motivation, because there is no inherent system in place. Right. So there, I think if you are able to put some positive energy and some positivism in the system, things happen, right? I mean, people sort of say IIT Bombay, for example, last 10-15 years have been able to bring in a positive energy there, same systems as other IITs, but probably therefore they are able to do it because there isn't this whole feedback and that kind of system. So then you have a more challenging task. You have to carry people with you through exhortation, through creating an environment, through whatever. So indeed it will be challenging. And then not to mention, external influences, how do you protect yourself from that? Because those things can demoralize people quite a bit. So it is hard maintaining them as well.
So let's say fighting all this, you're able to make a quality institute. So how can we make this institute globally competitive, or do we think about making our institute or universities at par with the best in the world?
So I think best in the world is, with all due respect to all of us and scientists, and I think is a far cry, because if you just look at the raw talent of the scientists and faculty there versus us, I mean, they pick the best from across the world. So obviously, including us, so obviously by definition, we are not going to be there. However, having said that, if you take the top layer away, we should be able to be in the next layer. I don't see much of it. I see the quality of people we have is the next layer is clearly where we belong. I think in many ways. If we were to put systems and incentives and other things where productivities, etc., whatever these people have done, I think we should be able to come in that. Perhaps even if we are capable for there, maybe that's the first strata to compete with, and then see where it goes, because these things are very slow processes. If you start seriously investing and implementing some well thought out plan now, it will probably take 10-15 years before it will show result.
So when we talk of global competition, or in fact global universities, Western universities particularly, there is an issue of scale. A lot of time our best institutes, IITs, you name any, or in fact big universities, they don't fall in the same category of scale. So our number of intake, number of students we take are kind of minuscule when you compare with the big schools across the world. So do we think about scale? Is scale even important when we make these quality institutes, or do we want to make it just the elite?
So I think scale in India, to say scale is not important is almost, is totally off the mark. Scale, if at all any place is needed, it's here, right? So I don't think but there's a couple of things. I note that you had this question. So a couple of things. First, I think a regulator or whoever somewhere, they think some student faculty ratio of 10, 12 or to 1 or some kind of, which is completely unrealistic and completely unnecessary. Even in the best of places in US, places like Georgia Tech, they maintain 20:1. In UC system, I believe 20:1 is the mandated kind of thing. In Australia, they've gone up to something like 35:1, and they want to push it further to lower the cost. So first of all, we need to free our systems far more, and we need to look at the best practices. How have they been able to scale so much, right? Of course, they have advantages. You can't just completely do that because they build next layer below the faculty and so on and so forth. So that has to be done, no doubt about it. But the other thing is, our models of management of an institute are also very, they're designed to be small. Director is, if you look at director of IIT or any, he is head of finance, he is head of academics, being chairman of Senate, he is also head of administration, he is also a sheriff of a town, and so there's just so many things that he has to look at which don't bother the counterpart in these big universities. So we need to think of models where, I don't know what that will be, but clearly somebody who can focus on academics, namely research and teaching, is freed from other things in terms of leadership. So we need to think of models. And third, and this I don't know why, but our basic approach in our country seems to be to grow the number of institutions rather than grow each institution. Right? That has been the approach. In fact, if you see, so the way colleges in Australia and UK, etc., they had this affiliated system also some 20-30 years back. The way they got out of it is they merged many of them into a university, right? In our case, rather than merging, we are taking one large university and breaking it. So our general trend is towards that, create an engineering college. As if that wasn't enough, create a IT engineering college, right? Create a management university which will only do management. That is not. So I don't know what is the thing, because we think that way, or whether our larger political system doesn't want large universities because earlier universities were politicized, or what. I really don't have an answer for this, but it's clear that our trend is to create more institutes of relatively small size. No IIT, as far as I know, has crossed 10,000 students, which is probably small university in US, right? The big universities are 35, 40, 45, 40,000 plus. At least today the thinking is that to do innovation, etc., which you also talked about, it is important to have multidisciplines within the campus. It is because it has been observed while it's theoretically possible to collaborate with anybody, but it works much better if it is on campus. So people have been talking about that, and globally the trend is to make them more broad-based. So in that sense, if we don't take these kinds of steps, I think we will find that we've made our job of reaching some global level harder.
But could the situation become better if the universities or institute for that matter can raise their own money and grow on their own? Because when you're dependent on government, probably you don't have that much leeway of saying that I want to grow 10 more thousand or 20 more thousand.
No, I don't think in India it is still very viable to take away government funding. So in US, the state schools, the very well endowed state schools still get some 10-20% of the budget from the government. The less endowed ones would get substantially higher. And there is this question of access and the cost. So and India is still a poor country, so I don't think we can do. But having said that, if the government intends to expand education, whatever may be your method of funding, combination of private public, one way is this, the other is to take each institution and expand. We don't seem to be thinking along those lines. We seem to be thinking only by expanding, by number of institutions. So, if we can provide resources to existing institutions of repute and say scale it up, and your funding will correspondingly be scaled.
Per student or something?
Yeah, per student, etc. So just to mention, Australia has a very nice model. It seems they have fixed out for domestic students, they have fixed certain amount per student, and that's what the university gets.
So incentive.
So there is an incentive for the university to have larger students. They compete to get the students.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting model. I mean, there is no reason that we can't try it out.
Yeah, actually, if you see, there is no incentive or reason why an existing institute should want to grow. It will be more work for administration, it will be more work for instructors, teachers, it will be more work in general, and more hassles to manage growth. So it is the easiest thing is not to grow.